Hello, friends. We are very interested to know which cities you are listening to us from, so quickly like and write in the comments where you are from. Also share what shocking stories happened in your city or maybe even with you personally. Subscribe because the next story could be about your city or even your personal drama. Now let's dive into a new exciting story. You are listening to the continuation of the story. You can listen to the previous part via the link in the description below this video. Happy listening. The house at 142 South Bay Road still looked abandoned, even though David Turner had done some cleaning up after returning from prison. A year spent locked up on suspicion of the murder of Laura Turner, his wife, whom everyone believed missing, or rather dead, turned the house into a sad monument to past family happiness. In the weeks since the charges were dropped, David has slowly returned to life. He got a job with Jack, an old acquaintance of Tom's, who ran a small construction company in Sarasota. It was not easy. His colleagues looked at him askance, recalling scandalous newspaper articles from a year ago in which Turner was called a husband who killed his wife for insurance or an aggressive psychopath with a motive for revenge. And although the court officially dropped all charges, people rarely believe the documents more than their own fears and rumors. Tom, the only friend who had not abandoned David, came almost every day. Sometimes they sat together on the porch with a bottle of beer, remembering better times. How he and Laura once went on vacation to the Bahamas, how they planned to have children together. These conversations invariably led to awkward silence. The topic of Laura was painful for David, like a fresh wound that would not heal. That evening, when David returned from a work trip to Naples, his condition was completely different. He burst into the house without even taking off his shoes and slammed the door noisily so that the glass rattled in the frames. A tense expression did not leave his face, a mixture of confusion, excitement, and some kind of crazy fire that flashed in his eyes. Tom, lounging in a chair in the living room, raised his eyebrows. "Damn, David, what are you doing?" It was like seeing a ghost. "Everything is fine." David didn't answer, just walked deeper into the room and collapsed on the sofa next to Tom. He was silent for a few more seconds, trying to even out his breathing. Finally, he said in a low voice, "I saw her." "Whom?" Tom asked warily. "Laura, in Naples." The air between them seemed to freeze. Tom stood up as if he wanted to make sure he heard correctly. "Laura, come on, maybe you just imagined it. You're tired after the journey, and—" "No," David interrupted him sharply. "I saw her face. I saw a mole on her hand. And that gesture when she straightens her hair. Tom, it was definitely her. I would swear by anything." Tom sighed heavily, leaned back in his chair, and rubbed his hands over his face. "Dude, if this is true, so, it turns out she's really alive." "It seems so," David smiled bitterly. "And all this time she lived somewhere under someone else's name. Or maybe not even under someone else's name, but simply left Tampa Bay. Damn." Tom spread his hands, unable to find words. "What a bitch. Yes, sorry, of course, but you can call her whatever you want. But it won't change anything." David closed his eyes, remembering the blue silhouette of a woman with a mole on her wrist. Scenes flashed before my eyes, a tiny detail on her hand, her hair, that unique tilt of her neck. The mind screamed, "She," and the heart sank with rage and pain. "But I can't just sit back, you know? I have to prove that she is alive. And not just for the sake of moral satisfaction. I want her to admit it herself." Tom nodded, trying to comprehend what he had heard. "Do you think the police will open a case? They would rather say, 'Nobody, no business.' I already called Rita Gonzalez, a detective. She's still a cold bitch, but I thought maybe she'd at least listen." "Yeah, I listened." She replied, "Turner, I don't have any new evidence. I need official confirmation that your wife is indeed in Naples. Until you prove that it is her, the case will not be reopened." And she hung up. Well, yes, typical. Tom rubbed his chin and looked at his friend. "Then what are you going to do?" "I don't know," David admitted hoarsely. "Maybe I'll go there and look for her in all the nooks and crannies. Or I'll keep track of where she goes and who she meets. But I can hardly cope alone. The city is not small. I have few clues. Tom frowned, as if considering alternatives. Listen, what if we involve Mark Evans? You said that you met him on the pier after the trial. Yes, he's that type, but wouldn't he be interested in knowing the truth? David winced at the mention of Mark. Mark, Laura's lover, who gave her $50,000 and sincerely believed all her stories about her evil and aggressive husband, who also went through interrogations and almost became the main suspect. Perhaps, David said after a pause, maybe he'll agree to help. But I hate the very thought of seeing him again, although he stopped short. A mixture of contradictions raged inside. On the one hand, it was Mark who helped Laura in her escape, perhaps without realizing it. On the other hand, Mark was also deceived. Laura extracted money from him by making up stories about a tyrant husband. And according to his words, he really loved her. It was difficult for David to understand where falsehood ends and real feeling begins. To hell with it, David finally decided. Tomorrow I'll go to this Mark. If he agrees to help, I will use every opportunity to find her. If not, I'll look for one. Just be careful, Tom sighed. I don't want some kind of brawl to bring you to the station again. You already have a hard time with your reputation. I understand, David muttered, but let him just try to refuse. He didn't finish. There was a lump in his throat from rage and disappointment. Tom patted him on the shoulder encouragingly, and they fell silent. It was a surprisingly cloudy morning in Tampa Bay. A gray veil of clouds covered the sky, and the wet wind from the bay forced the palm trees to bend almost to the ground. David sat behind the wheel of his Ford, the engine purring as the car slowly crept along the coastal road towards the house where Mark Evans lived. David learned about the address a year ago, when the police were collecting dossiers on everyone associated with Laura. Then Haley's lawyer provided him with this paper, trying to find evidence in David's favor. But a direct clash with Evans was avoided until recently. Mark's house turned out to be a modern cottage with large windows and a well-kept lawn. Everything looked quite stylish, with a hint of prosperity. Well, of course, thought David, smiling wryly, the head of the sales department, plus decent money, which he did not regret paying Laura. Having stopped the car at the side of the road, David turned off the engine and just sat for several seconds, looking at the door of the house. His heart was pounding. Oddly enough, he was nervous, either from anger or from fear that Mark would simply tell him to go to hell. Finally, he forced himself to leave. Mark himself opened the door. He looked tired and slightly shabby, although he still wore a neatly ironed shirt and suit trousers. His gaze, noticing David, darkened, and his eyebrows moved into a frown. "Turner?" he asked tensely, clearly not expecting the visit. "What do you want?" David felt long-suppressed irritation flare up in his chest, but he knew that he couldn't explode now. "I want to talk," he answered, trying to keep his voice even. "About Laura." Mark's face twitched as if from a blow. He looked around, as if checking to see if anyone was listening, then reluctantly stepped aside. "Come in, but not for long," he muttered. "I have a meeting in an hour." The living room was illuminated by soft light from a large panoramic window. Everything was furnished with taste. An ivory sofa, a glass coffee table, shelves with books on business and marketing. David almost snorted. Maybe that's why Laura clung to him. Prestige, comfort, illusion of success. "Sit down," Mark suggested reluctantly, pointing to the sofa. He sat down in the chair opposite and crossed his arms over his chest. "So, what do you want?" "I saw her," David blurted out, looking Mark in the eye. "Recently, in Naples." The conversation began without prelude, and Mark, it seemed, was not ready for this. He shuddered and tensed, as if about to jump. "What?" That's all he asked. "Heard." "I'm saying I saw Laura," David repeated in a slightly more subdued tone. "On the street, at the flower stall. Well, I'm sure it's her. But I need proof for the police to reopen the case. They don't want to listen yet." Mark was silent for a long time, looking away. Then he slowly stood up and walked around the room, as if unable to find a place for himself. "Are you sure you didn't make a mistake?" he asked finally, not hiding his doubts. "A year has passed. Maybe you just have an obsession." "I know her gestures, her mole on her wrist, her gait," David muttered. "Do you think I'm an idiot? I was married to her for more than 1 year, after all." "Okay, let's say it's her." Mark turned to him. A strange mixture of bitterness and curiosity flashed in his eyes. "So what now? What do you want? Revenge?" "I want her to answer for everything she's done," David snapped. "For money, for lies, for the fact that I rotted in prison for a year. And yes, I want this whole farce to end. I need the police to make sure Laura is alive. This means there were no murders." Mark sat down on the armrest of the chair, crossing his arms over his chest. There was a gloomy grimace on his face. "Don't you think this should make you happy? You shouldn't be in jail anymore. You left, the case was closed." "Formally, yes, but people don't believe it." David's voice trembled. "For them, I'm still the one who killed his wife. I want to dispel it." Mark raised his eyebrows. An understanding suddenly appeared in his gaze. He, too, had gone through interrogations, through suspicion, through the destruction of his reputation. He was also under surveillance because of his connection with Laura. "Okay," he said after a heavy pause. "And how can I help?" "Let's go to Naples." "Help me find her," David said, trying not to sound pleading. "You know her habits, tastes, and places. Maybe she lives there with someone. Flowers, perhaps, for someone. Or so for yourself. But it takes me more than just seconds to photograph her. We need to establish where she lives and under what name, so that the cops don't brush it off." Mark turned to the window, which showed a dull view of the neighboring yard. It was drizzling lightly. He was silent for several seconds, then quietly answered, "You know, I also want to understand what happened. Because I trusted her. I loved her, damn it. And she—" He paused, swallowed, apparently holding back his emotions. "I'll help, but not for your sake, but for my own sake. I also need to close this issue once and for all." "Okay," David nodded. He stood up. His soul was heavier than he expected. "Are we leaving tomorrow?" "Okay," Mark replied, still avoiding his gaze. "Call in the morning. I'll make arrangements with the office to take time off. Just let's avoid unnecessary conflicts." "Whatever you say," David grinned. He headed towards the exit, and when he grabbed the door handle, Mark called out to him, "David." He turned around. Mark stood in the middle of the room, looking confused and vulnerable, like a teenager suddenly left without illusions. "It's just," Mark sighed, "I'm sorry again that it all turned out this way. If I knew about her plans, I would." "I know," David answered shortly. "It's all Laura. Me too. And I don't know what to say. See you tomorrow." And he went out into the rain without waiting for an answer. The car was waiting for him at the side of the road, and his head was noisy with thoughts and feelings that could not calm down. The first steps towards the truth have been taken. The next morning, they met at the curb near Mark's house. David's car rumbles at idle as he waits. Mark came out in his usual suit, but without a tie. I had a folder tucked under my arm. He sat in the passenger seat, looking tense and silent. "What's in the folder?" David asked as he pulled out onto the road. "Old photographs," Mark answered reluctantly. "Maybe they will come in handy. Copies of those that Laura sent me by email. Places we've been. If we see something familiar in Naples, we'll know she's there." David snorted, inventive. "Okay, let's go. 3 hours away, there is time to talk." At first we drove in silence. Only the noise of the engine and the rustle of wheels on wet asphalt. But an hour later, when the landscape outside the window gave way to inconspicuous hills and palm groves, Mark himself spoke. "Do you really think that she just lives under her own name? It's risky." "Maybe she changed her last name," David shrugged. "But you can't hide your appearance. And Tampa Bay is far away. Everyone considered it dead for a long time. She probably didn't expect me to be in Naples for work." "That's right. And this money? The account she cleaned out. 50,000 from me, 120 from your account. This is a pretty decent amount. Yet, enough to live in peace if you save. David squeezed the steering wheel tighter, remembering how he discovered an empty bank account. But not forever. They fell silent. Then Mark asked carefully, "Didn't you think that she might have someone else?" David smiled bitterly. "Who knows? After all, she had the audacity to hook up with you right away, lie to me, and also take money. Maybe now she has new victims." Uh-huh. Mark looked out the window. A shadow passed over his face. They arrived in Naples around noon. The day turned out to be hot. The sun was scorching, as if it had forgotten about the recent rain. Entire blocks of tourist shops, open-air cafes, colorful signs, souvenirs, boat trips, and fish delicacies filled the coastal area. The car had to be left in a public parking lot. Together with Mark, they went out into the street, squinting slightly from the bright light. So, Mark lifted the folder. "Where do we start?" "I saw her near the flower stand on 12th Street. "He's about 2 blocks from here." David pointed south with his hand. "I suggest going there." They found the stall quite quickly. Peeling paint, the smell of roses, carnations, and lilies, buckets of water. Behind the counter stood a man of about 40, slightly sunburned, with a cap pulled down over his forehead. He was just putting the buds into a new bunch. David nodded to Mark, who took the hint and stayed a little behind, letting David act. "Hi," David said, leaning on the counter. "Excuse me, do you work here permanently?" The man turned around and squinted. "Yeah, for a couple of years now, if not more." "Will you be buying anything?" "Maybe later. I'm looking for the woman who recently took flowers from you. Blonde hair, blue dress, blue eyes, a mole on his right hand." He spoke, trying to describe Laura in as much detail as possible. "You don't remember this one?" The seller took off his cap and rubbed his forehead. "A lot of people pass by here, but maybe I'll remember. Did she take red roses?" David perked up. "Yes, I guess." "Do you know anything about her?" The man wrinkled his face, trying to concentrate. "I came a couple of times, and always in the evening. I also wondered why she needed flowers at night. But the thing is, everyone has their own taste. I asked her once if he was going on a date, and she just smiled. We exchanged a few words. She said that she lives near the beach, rents a house with another woman. I think her friend's name is either Sarah or Sarah, something like that." David's heart skipped a beat. Sarah? The same Sarah, Laura's friend, with whom they worked in the same office. He knew that they sometimes had lunch together, but he didn't think that Sarah could also be drawn into this scam. "Sarah?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even. "Are you sure?" "Well, I don't remember exactly, but it sounded similar. What's the problem?" "No, everything's fine." David smiled tightly. "Thanks for the information. Maybe I'll take some roses from you later. See for yourself." The seller shrugged and returned to his flowers. David quickly moved away from the stall and motioned to Mark. He, having barely listened, exhaled heavily. "Sarah, crap. I remember her blonde. In Laura's office, she was listed as a client manager. Do you think they lived together?" Judging by the seller's words, yes. David frowned, trying to understand why Sarah was here too. Maybe they are friends. Laura decided to help. Or something more. Although Laura rarely mentioned Sarah. "She didn't talk about me either, right?" Mark smiled wryly. "Good idea. And yet it's strange. Sarah then, a year ago, did not seem like a person ready for a scam. Although..." David shrugged. "Who will sort them out?" "Okay," Mark decided. "This seller said that they are renting a house near the beach. There are several streets near the beach where houses are rented out. Let's go look. Maybe we can talk to the owners. They definitely need to know those to whom they rent out housing for a long term." David agreed. Now they moved purposefully from one house for rent ad to another, asking local agents and neighbors if a woman with blonde hair and her friend named Sarah were renting there. They weren't lucky right away. Several agents looked blankly and just shrugged. Finally, on one of the streets, a small one, strewn with fine gravel, leading directly to a white sand beach, they met the owner of two houses. It was a thin man in a Hawaiian shirt named Anthony. He listened to them with noticeable interest. Blonde hair? Are you sure she is? He frowned, pushing the printed contracts aside. I have two women who rent a house a little closer to the beach. One of them is blonde, short, the other is brown-haired, it seems. But I don't remember their names. Wait a second, I'll look at the documents now. David and Mark looked at each other. Two women suitable. Anthony took out a folder and rustled the papers. Here, the lease is signed in the name of Sarah Mills. He ran his finger along the line. And the second one is designated as her guest, but without details. They moved in about 10 months ago. 10 months? This almost coincides with Laura's disappearance, David noted to himself. Everything inside him sank. It seemed like the puzzle was starting to come together. Don't you have any photos of them? Mark asked carefully. Anthony shook his head. No. But I can describe it. Sarah is of average height, shoulder-length hair, and often wears business suits. The other one is also average. Her hair is a little longer. There is a mole on her arm. She is so calm and keeps to herself. Her name was like Lauren or what? Lauren. Replacing Laura with Lauren is a simple trick, but probably enough to confuse neighbors who don't go into detail. David felt the blood pounding in his temples. Could you tell me the exact address? He asked as politely as possible. You see, this is very important. We need to find them for personal reasons. Anthony frowned, hesitating. But Mark immediately pulled out a business card from his pocket. We're not police, it's just. This is a personal matter. If necessary, we can pay any moral damages for the disclosure of personal information. He shook his head. Well, there is nothing secret in the agreement. They themselves did not ask for much confidentiality. The address is 14th Street, House 22. There is a yellow cottage near the water. Thank you. David almost jumped out of his seat, but managed to add, we appreciate your help. They quickly said goodbye, leaving a rather bewildered Anthony in his Hawaiian shirt. When they were a good distance away, David stopped, took a breath, and looked at Mark. Looks like we found her. Yellow cottage on 14th Street. Mark clenched his fists, but his face expressed not so much anger as painful determination. So what now? Let's just rush in there. Are you crazy? David shook his head. It won't be legal for the police. We need a compelling reason, and a warrant wouldn't hurt. But I want to at least make sure it's really her. If I see it in person, I can call Rita, and then let them act officially. Okay, Mark sighed. Let's do this. Let's come and watch. If we see her, we'll take a photo. We will have at least some kind of evidence base. David agreed. They moved towards 14th Street, where the salty wind from the sea smelled of something fresh and invigorating, and there was a quiet roar of surf in the air. The bustle of the city seemed to have stayed away. The street was almost deserted. Simple cottages with wooden shutters, manicured lawns, and small front porch gardens lined a sandy path. Sea sand crushed underfoot, thrown by the wind onto the asphalt. Finally, they saw the yellow cottage, number 22. It looked welcoming. A white door, shutters, a narrow path of shells leading to a small porch. The windows were covered with curtains, and it was difficult to tell if anyone was inside. Let's go behind that tall bush, David suggested in a whisper, nodding at the tall hibiscus bush opposite the house. You can see the door from there. Let's wait. It's somehow strange. Mark grumbled, but still followed, like in a cheap detective story. They settled down behind a bush, trying not to be too much of an eyesore to the rare passers-by. About an hour passed. The sun was already high, and sweat flowed from their foreheads in streams. The wind carried the sound of waves. David was beginning to think that no one would come out when the cottage door suddenly opened. His heart sank, he tensed, peering at the figure on the porch. Sarah. That one, Laura's colleague, with short blonde locks slightly tousled by the sea wind, came out onto the porch and stretched, like a person who had been sitting indoors for a long time. She was wearing simple shorts and a t-shirt. Her gaze was distracted, as if she was thinking about something else. On the wrist is a thin bracelet. Damn, it's her, David whispered. Sarah from the office. So the seller didn't lie, Mark concluded gloomily. Where is Laura? Sarah turned back, preparing to return to the house, but then another figure appeared on the threshold. A woman in a light dress, with long blonde hair that was once a little shorter. There was no doubt Laura, but that wasn't the most shocking thing. Laura carefully held a small child in her other hand. Judging by the size and the way the child moved his arms, he was about a year old, a little more. What the? Mark hissed, and it was as if a bomb had exploded inside David. He almost jumped out of surprise, but managed to restrain himself in time. Laura adjusted the Panama hat on the girl's head with a smile. From this distance, it was clear that the baby seemed to be able to walk a little. She was stamping her feet on the porch, holding on to her mother's hand. Sarah bent down to the child, squeezed her plump cheek, and muttered something affectionately. The little girl giggled. David couldn't take his eyes off this scene. Shock and amazement literally paralyzed him. Baby, Laura and Sarah. But if the child is about a year old, he was born shortly after Laura disappeared. David's heart began to beat so hard that his ears began to ring. Really, she gave birth, was all he squeezed out. Oh my God, Mark whispered. And who is the father? David felt a storm of emotions wash over him. Anger, jealousy, pain, shock, everything mixed up. In a couple of seconds, life turned upside down again. Laura, who was considered missing or killed, lives quietly here with her friend, and she has a child. Holding their breath, they took several pictures. David did not let go of the phone from his trembling hands. Mark helped, trying to point the camera so that both the child and Laura were visible. Then Laura and Sarah went into the house, closing the door. The girl's small squeal reached them for another second and then died down. Are you okay? Mark asked carefully as David put the phone down. I don't know, he whispered, closing his eyes. My throat felt a spasm. It looks like this is the child of one of us, Mark. If you estimate the time, it turns out that she became pregnant even before her disappearance. Mark grimaced and ran his hand through his hair. Damn, I didn't know she was pregnant. And she definitely didn't have such a plan with me. So maybe it's yours. Anything is possible, David answered bitterly. But now I 100% want the police to get involved. She stole money, deceived us both, and also hid the child. This goes beyond all limits. I agree, Mark nodded. We have photographs. Let's go call Rita. David stood up, trying to stop shaking. Everything inside was screaming he wanted to burst into this house, grab Laura's hand and shout, "How could you?" But he understood that he would only break the law and expose himself. We need to act through the police officially. After all, now there is irrefutable evidence that Laura is not a murder victim, but a fugitive and a fraudster who stole a large sum. And what's more, she has a child. This means that a completely new dimension has appeared in the matter. They walked slowly down the street, trying not to look back. When they reached the parking lot, David finally stopped and, having dialed Rita Gonzalez's number, exhaled. Put it on speakerphone, Mark asked. I also have something to say. David nodded as the phone rang in silence. After several beeps, a familiar female voice was heard, dry and slightly irritated. Detective Gonzalez. I'm listening. Rita, this is David Turner. He spoke quickly and excitedly. I have proof that Laura is alive. I'm in Naples right now, and I saw her with my own eyes. Took photos. There was tense silence on the other end. David, if this is a joke. Rita began, but he interrupted. No prank. I'm serious. I can send you a photo by email. Please check. Mark Evans, and I saw everything. Laura and... He sighed heavily, and there's also a child. Damn it. Rita seemed to have lost her usual composure. Okay, give me the mail. Send everything you have and give the address where she is now. David quickly spelled out the address of the yellow cottage. Then he disconnected and, with trembling fingers, sent the photos. Somewhere in the depths of his soul, He hoped that now the police would come and sort everything out. But he knew that it would take time. He needed to agree on jurisdiction, get a warrant, and Naples itself was a different county. Mark, watching him type, asked quietly, "What's next?" "We are waiting further. Perhaps the local cops will come. Rita will coordinate everything. I'm not going to take any chances. We did what we could." "Yes," Mark agreed. "That's probably right." David leaned back in the car seat. Everything was seething inside him. A picture of Laura holding a child, perhaps his daughter. I couldn't get it out of my head. If the girl is really about 15 months old, then she should have been born around December 2024. And Laura disappeared in March, so she was already 3 or 4 months pregnant when she ran away. Did she really know about this and specifically wanted to hide, convincing the whole world that her husband killed her? Rage and pain overwhelmed him. But on the other hand, another question was raised. If this is really his daughter, then what to do now? Will he be able to claim custody? How terrible of a person do you have to be to pull such a trick? David didn't know the answers. He only felt that the hurricane of change was spinning again, and this time at the epicenter was not only Laura with her lies, but also the innocent baby born in this lie. The evening came quickly. The sun was already setting below the horizon, painting the sky over the bay in soft pinks and oranges, when a police car pulled up to 14th Street, followed by another. David and Mark sat in their car, parked in the distance, watching what was happening. Rita Gonzalez, as promised, sent a message to their phone. "The squad will be there at 18 o'clock. You will be asked to leave or remain at a distance. Don't interfere." But of course, they couldn't just leave. David wanted to make sure that everything would go according to plan and Laura would actually be detained and not lost as her traces were lost a year ago. Two people in civilian clothes and one in a police uniform got out of the car. The older one was apparently a detective from the local department. They went to the door and knocked. David held his breath. All that could be heard from the street was the abrupt, "Naples police, open up." The door was opened, judging by the silhouette, by Sarah. Laura didn't show up. A conversation immediately began. From a distance, it was impossible to hear the remarks, but from the gestures it was clear. Sarah first tried to object, then looked shocked. The plainclothes detective was showing something, probably a warrant or some documents. Soon Sarah was taken outside, where another officer was already standing. Sarah did not resist, but looked scared and looked around. At that moment, Laura appeared at the door, hugging the girl to her. The baby whimpered in fear, there were loud male voices, and an unfamiliar bustle all around. Laura quickly realized what was happening and wanted to slam the door, but the policeman stuck his hand in. There was a short pause, Laura shouted something, and the child burst into tears. Finally, one of the officers carefully took the girl into his arms, and the other handcuffed Laura. "Damn, they're serious there," Mark muttered. "Of course, seriously," David muttered through his teeth. "Theft, fraud, faking disappearance. And that's not all." Officers escorted both women from the home. Laura screamed something loudly and struggled, but to no avail. The baby cried in the arms of another officer. She was taken into a separate car. "Let's go," David said, opening the pickup door. "You are sure?" Mark asked warily. "We were asked to stay away." "I don't care. What if this is my child? I should be there." David stepped towards the police, trying not to look aggressive. The officer at the car noticed them and waved his hand. "Hey, get back. This place is cordoned off." David raised his hands, showing that he was unarmed, and shouted, "I am David Turner, possibly the father of this child. I have photographs. I spoke with Detective Gonzalez. Let me look at my daughter." The policeman frowned, took out his walkie-talkie, and muttered something. A minute later, the same detective who led the operation approached them. "Mr. Turner?" "Yes, I've heard about you. Detective Gonzalez asked that we let her know if you show up. The child is safe, the girl is in shock, but appears to be okay. Are you sure this is your daughter?" "Yes," David's heart sank. "Everything fits in terms of timing, and I want to do a DNA test to confirm, but for God's sake, don't give her away to a shelter somewhere. She will be placed temporarily in the custody of Child Protective Services until the circumstances are clarified. The detective responded, "Sorry, but that's the order. We can't just hand her over to a person who hasn't officially proven paternity." "I understand." David lowered his head. Mark exhaled noisily on the side, clearly not knowing what to add. "And Laura and Sarah?" David asked, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Arrested. We will bring charges of fraud and misappropriation of other people's funds. Perhaps something else will be added. In general, this is not an easy matter. Both our department and yours will deal with it. For now, they will be taken to the station for questioning. Would you like to attend?" "Yes, I want to," David nodded decisively. "I want to see her. And here." The detective nodded. "Then let's follow the patrol car. But I warn you, everything is under our control. You have no right to interfere in the interrogation without a lawyer or appropriate authority." "I understand," David breathed. He turned around and saw officers putting Sarah into one car and Laura into another. The child is put in the third. The girl was still crying quietly, reaching out to Laura, and she, through her panic and tears, tried to say something, but the policeman held her back. David's heart sank with pity for the baby. She didn't understand what was happening. Her world was collapsing right now, without any explanation. When the cars started moving, he and Mark returned to their pickup truck and followed. The road to the site took only 10 minutes, but seemed like an eternity. Thoughts in David's head were spinning like a whirlwind. He was trying to figure out how everything would turn out now. Would Laura confess? What punishment would she face? What would happen to the child? At the Naples police station, the hallways were long and dimly lit. The smell of coffee, paper, and sweat filled the space. Laura and Sarah were separated. One was taken to one interrogation room, the other to another. David was initially told to stay in the waiting room. Mark sat down next to him and silently looked at the floor. Half an hour later, the same detective came out to them. "Mr. Turner, we can invite you for interrogation with Laura if you want. But we warn you, you do not have procedural status. You are formally a victim in a case of theft of money, but this is a different aspect. If she agrees to speak in your presence." "You're welcome," David replied. "I want to. I need this." Mark stayed outside. When David entered a small room with a table, 2 chairs, and a mirror, he saw Laura. She sat with her arms crossed over her chest, her hair disheveled, her eyes red from tears. There were no longer handcuffs on his wrists, but reddened marks were clearly visible. When David appeared, she shuddered as if she had seen a ghost. "David," she whispered. "Hello, Laura," he answered calmly, although everything was bubbling inside. The detective took a seat next to him and turned on the recorder. "So, Mrs. or Miss Turner," he grinned, looking into the folder. "Your last name on the documents is still Turner, except for the lease, where you are listed as Lauren. We have a discrepancy here." Laura pursed her lips and looked away. "We're glad you agreed to have Mr. Turner present," the detective continued. "I think he has questions, too. Let's start with the main thing. You were wanted as a missing person. A year ago, your husband was accused of your murder. How do you explain this?" She didn't answer. She just bit her lip, as if trying to hold back the flow of words. "Laura," David spoke, trying to keep his voice even. "I was in prison for almost a year before I was finally acquitted. Everyone thought I killed you." "For what?" "It's not that simple," she whispered, her face contorted with emotion. You would know if you listened to me." "Did I listen to you?" David raised his voice, but stopped short. We remind ourselves that he doesn't want to break down. "About what?" "About how you stole our joint savings and ran away. About the fact that you took money from Mark by telling him stories about an aggressive husband. The fact that you gave birth to a child and never told me." Laura shuddered and shrugged her shoulders stubbornly. I was afraid. I thought you. If you find out that I'm pregnant, you won't give me a divorce, or you'll start blackmailing me." "What?" David couldn't resist and hit the table with his fist. "What the hell?" Yes, I didn't know about pregnancy at all. If I had known, I would have tried even more to save the family. Have I ever laid a hand on you? She fell silent, unable to find words. The detective cleared his throat. And yet, Mrs. Turner, you deliberately disappeared, staging your disappearance and possibly murder. This is a serious accusation, stealing money from the account and even money from Mr. Evans. I didn't mean to, Laura began. From the very beginning, I just wanted to leave. You see, I fell in love with another woman, and we wanted to be together. Saru, the detective clarified in an even tone, which we also detained. Laura nodded, nervously crumpling the edge of her sleeve. Yes, it all started before I even met Mark. He was so in love with me and he offered to help. I just took advantage. Yes, it's despicable, perhaps, but I had no other choice. I thought David would never let me go, that he would be angry because he is so hot-tempered. David gasped, hot-tempered. Yes, I never gave up. And when you started dating Mark, I didn't even scream. I just wanted to get a peaceful divorce. Why did you make a monster out of me? Because I was afraid. Laura blurted out, breaking into a scream. I was afraid that if you found out the truth that I love a woman, that I'm going to take our money and live with her, you won't leave me alone. I knew you hired a detective to follow me. I needed to disappear so that I could safely give birth to the child. Sarah loves me too, Laura sank. We really wanted a full-fledged family, and we decided that we would just say that this was a donor or something else. When Emma was born, Emma, David repeated, as if tasting the name. So her name is Emma. Laura sighed, her gaze slid somewhere to the side. Yes, Emma. Born in December 2024, right after my disappearance. I was 4 months old when I left. And we lived here in Naples. We were happy. That's how it is. David looked down, feeling anger pulsing inside him. So, all this is for the sake of escaping to Sarah and the child. The child lived here all this time, grew up, believed that he had a mother, and two mothers, Laura clarified coldly. How could you? David's voice broke into a whisper. This is my child. I dreamed of children, you knew. Laura didn't answer. The detective who was watching them commented quietly, it looks like there is every reason to send the case to court on a number of counts. Mrs. Turner, you should consider pleading guilty. What about Sarah? Asked David. Was she an accomplice? She agreed to run away together. Laura nodded, wincing. But basically, it was my idea. She just loved me. Not just, the detective corrected dryly. Helped you hide the child, knowingly participated in fraud. We have already taken her testimony. Laura spread her hands helplessly. Tears appeared in her eyes again. I'm sorry, David. If my words make you feel any better, know that I didn't want you to go to jail. I thought the police would think I ran away myself. But everything got out of control. Forgiveness? David asked bitterly. You took away a year of my life, my honest work, my reputation, perhaps our daughter. What kind of sorry can fix this? She didn't answer. The detective turned off the recorder and took off the headset. That's enough for today. Tomorrow, we will continue the official interrogation with a lawyer. Mrs. Turner, you will be taken to your cell. Mr. Turner, I would like you to leave the premises. David stood up slowly. Laura breathed shakily, hugging herself by the shoulders. He remembered a scene a long time ago, in the first months of their relationship. Laura hugged her shoulders in the same way when she was angry or worried. Then he consoled her, hugged her, and said that everything would be fine. Now it seemed like a stupid joke. He turned around and went out into the corridor. Mark was waiting outside, standing up when he saw David. Well, she admitted everything. I was with Sarah, took my money, your money, gave birth to a child. And she didn't even think to warn me, David answered, feeling his voice tremble. Do you know the girl's name? Emma. Mark sighed heavily. I'm sorry, dude. Listen, but what will they do now? While they are put in a pre-trial detention center, they will wait for trial. Emma, apparently, will be placed in social services or whatever. David almost shuddered. I don't want this. But for now, I do not have the official status of a father. We urgently need to do a DNA test. Mark nodded. Let me help. If you need to pay for laboratory services, I can handle it myself, David interrupted, although in his heart he was grateful to Mark. After all, this man went through a similar betrayal and also deserved answers. You can go back to Tampa if you want. No, I'll stay. I don't know yet how it will end. I also need to testify. Mark shrugged. We need to close this all down once and for all. At that moment, an officer approached them and ordered them to go into another room to give official testimony in the case. David had no choice to immerse himself in endless questions, protocol, signatures. And so, step by step, events moved inexorably towards judgment. In a couple of days, David managed to hire the same lawyer, John Haley, who defended him from false accusations, met with him in Naples and outlined the situation. Money, arrest, Laura, child. We need to do a DNA test, Haley said immediately. Without this, you will not be able to claim custody or even temporary placement of the child with you. I know, David nodded. The question is when and how. The police agreed to cooperate, Haley explained, because it is in the interests of the child to determine who the father is as soon as possible. I think by the end of the week, they will take samples from you and the girl. The results will come in a few days, a maximum of a week. Fine. In the meantime, what? For now, she is in a reception center under the care of government services. You can apply for temporary visits, although this is usually difficult until there is confirmation. But we'll try. David felt empty. He wanted everything at once, to take the baby out of there, take her home, surround her with care. But I understood that it was not so simple. The law is the law. And one more terrible thought, what if the girl isn't his? Although Laura said that it was definitely David, but to believe her words, and Mark affirmatively stated that they used protection. The judicial machine began to move. Laura and Sarah were escorted to a local detention center. Their case was under articles of fraud, grand theft, and could have been punished with a sentence of up to 5 years or more. This does not yet take into account the moral damage to David, who was illegally accused of murder, although formally it was a miscalculation of the police. Mark, having given his testimony, was still in Naples, deciding what to do next. That evening, she and David met at a cheap motel near the police station to discuss the news. Both seemed exhausted, but no longer felt hostility towards each other. A year ago, they had been rivals over Laura. Now they had become a kind of allies against her betrayal. Am I in the way? Mark entered the room and looked around. A bed, a small table, a TV on the wall. How are you? Norm, David shrugged, inviting him to sit down. Tomorrow they will take DNA samples from me. I hope everything will be resolved soon. Mark smiled wryly. You know, I still can't believe that she deceived us like that. Simultaneously, and you and I, and in the end, she sat with Sarah, raising the child. Yes, really, David gritted his teeth. Bitch, sorry, I can't find any other words. Listen, what if? Well, it suddenly turns out that the girl is not yours. What will you do? I have no idea, David answered honestly. But most likely, it's from me. Everything fits in time. Mark sighed. I understand. But I, look at this whole situation and think, thank God, I didn't have time to marry her or something else. Although the money that she squeezed out of me will probably never be returned. With good lawyers, maybe you can get some of it back, David corrected. There is physical evidence, translations, and her confession, but still hardly the full amount. They both fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. From the outside, it might seem that there were two soldiers sitting there after a protracted war, who had been deceived and abandoned to their fate. But at least now they didn't see each other as an enemy. The next morning at the Naples police station, an officer led David into a small medical office where a short man in a white coat, who specialized in collecting genetic samples for forensics, was already standing. Open your mouth, he asked politely, taking a cotton swab. David obeyed, trying not to think about the fact that this small piece of saliva was now deciding the fate of the rest of his life. What does it feel like to be the father of a girl who already walks, talks, laughs, and you haven't even seen her until now? Flashed through my head. The doctor sealed the tampon in a bag and signed it. Then he nodded to the officer. Now we need to take a sample from the child. Shall we pass? Yes, David croaked, his heart pounding. Finally, he will see Emma. For real, in a calm atmosphere, not in the hustle and bustle of an arrest. They went to another wing of the building, to a small room for social workers, where at least there were toys and a table. A young woman, apparently a psychologist from the ward, was sitting on a chair at the table, and Emma was next to her. A little girl with slightly curly blonde hair, huge eyes that looked with curiosity. Seeing strangers, she shrank warily, but did not cry. David stopped, looking at her, unable to move. It seemed to him that he was seeing some kind of miracle. "Oh my God, this is my daughter," flashed through my head. "Mine or not, but she is real." The psychologist smiled. "Hello, are you Mr. Turner? You want to take DNA samples from Emma, right?" "Yes," David answered hoarsely, feeling his voice giving out. "Don't worry, everything will be quick and painless." A man in a robe approached Emma. "Hello, baby, open your mouth." She looked at him suspiciously, but allowed him to gently move the swab along the inside of her cheek. David involuntarily smiled, seeing how carefully the doctor handled the baby. After a few seconds, the procedure was over and the tampon was also sealed. "It's ready," said the medic. "The results will be out in a few days." David squatted down, trying not to scare the child. "Hello, Emma," he said quietly. He wanted to say, "I'm your dad," but stopped short, realizing that she wouldn't understand and that it hadn't been proven yet. The girl looked at him carefully. Her gaze was the same as Laura's had once been direct, piercing, and suddenly David felt excited. "Maybe it's really mine." She extended her little hand and touched his knee. Such a small gesture, and David almost burst into tears from the surging feelings. He smiled cautiously and handed her a small, soft toy that was lying on the table. Emma took it, squeezed it, and nodded as if to say, "Thank you." The psychologist said in a soft voice, "She is about 15 months old, understands some words, and is learning to speak. But the situation is stressful for her. She has lost her usual environment. I want everything to be resolved as soon as possible," David barely managed to say, "so that she can be with me if paternity is confirmed." "Everything will be according to the law," the woman reassured him. "If you are a father, you will be granted custody, but you will have to go through formalities, parental behavior courses, and a home inspection. These are standard measures." "Of course," David nodded, standing up. It was difficult to leave. He was too drawn to stay with Emma. But the officer was already looking at him, letting him know that it was time. David's heart sank when he turned around on the threshold and noticed Emma look away, plunging back into studying the toy. Maybe she won't even remember him. But for him, these 2 minutes with the child have already turned the world upside down. The following days passed in anxious anticipation. David bounced between Naples and Tampa Bay, periodically visiting Tom, who was constantly interested in the news. "Well, did you find out the test results?" Mark also settled temporarily in Naples, renting a hotel and planning to return to work a little later. Laura and Sarah remained in custody. The police were completing their investigation and preparing the case for trial. And finally, one evening, David received a call from the investigator. "Mr. Turner, DNA test results. Family ties are confirmed with a probability of 99.99%. Emma is your daughter." David was simply speechless for a few seconds. Then he exhaled, "Thank you. What now?" "You will need to attend the custody hearing. The court will order temporary placement of Emma with you or with a foster family, depending on the judge's decision. But given that the charges against you are dropped, you have a stable income and housing, you will most likely receive custody." "I see," David whispered, feeling mixed emotions. Thank you. After hanging up the phone, he sat down on the sofa, closing his eyes. It's done. Emma really is his daughter. Every moment of the last weeks, every torment and hope, everything came true. But on the other hand, he had no idea how to be a father, how to raise a baby you saw once and only for a couple of minutes. Tom, having learned the news, was indescribably delighted. Well, finally, good news. You're going to become a father. It's official. What a father I am, David smiled bitterly. I don't even know what diapers she wears or what to feed her when she cries. And in general, I was sure that. We need to study, Tom shrugged. It's like this for everyone. My sister gave birth, and she and her husband also didn't understand anything at first, and then they got involved. The main thing is, don't hang your head. Everything will work out. I hope, David tried to smile, but his soul was torn by fear. He understood. Being a father is not an honorary title, but a huge responsibility. And the question still remained. How would Emma perceive the changes? She lived with Laura and Sarah from birth. The days flew by quickly. Finally, the court met to decide the issue of temporary custody. The meeting room is small, intimate, without unnecessary pomp. The judge was a short woman with kind eyes who nevertheless spoke rather sternly. Next to her, on the left hand, is the prosecutor. On the right is the defense attorney for Laura and Sarah. David sat at a separate table with his lawyer, Haley. Behind him, in the back of the hall, Tom silently supported his friend, and Mark stood aside, not interfering, but clearly rooting for David. The judge flipped through the papers. So, the child is Emma Turner, 15 months old. The mother is in custody on charges of fraud and embezzlement, potential alteration of identity, and the father, Mr. David Turner, has been DNA tested. Any objections? Laura's defense attorney stood up. Your Honor, my client believes that Mr. Turner is aggressive and incapable of raising a child. She points out that it was precisely because of the threats from his side. The objection is rejected, the judge said harshly. The police and social services found no evidence of aggression. The court has already ruled that Mr. Turner will not be prosecuted. If there had been aggression, he would not have received a not guilty verdict. Do you want to add something substantive? The lawyer shrugged and sat down. The judge nodded to Haley. What is your position? He stood up. My client wants to take custody of his daughter. He has a stable job and a home. The guardianship authorities have no objections. Since the environment is safe, the child needs a permanent guardian. The judge looked through the papers again, then looked up. Mr. Turner, do you understand what it means to take custody of a 15-month-old girl? This is not a joke. Are you ready? David stood up, trying to speak confidently. Yes, Your Honor. I understand that I will have to change a lot in my life, but this is my daughter. I will do whatever it takes to keep her safe and loved. The judge smiled at the corners of her lips. Okay? In this case, I make the decision to place Emma Turner in the temporary custody of her father, Mr. David Turner, pending a final verdict in the mother's case and pending a further hearing to establish permanent custody. The meeting is over. The sound of a hammer. David felt as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, but then another one fell responsibility. He sat down tiredly, covering his face with his hands. Tom sighed quietly with relief. Mark also exhaled, as if he was happy for his friend. Already leaving the hall, David ran into Laura's lawyer, the same young woman with a short haircut who defended not only Laura, but also Sarah. She stopped him and asked quietly, Have you thought about what will happen to Laura? She also has rights to the child. David answered, narrowing his eyes, Let her think about what will happen to her term. My daughter will no longer live in the shadow of her machinations. The lawyer threw up her hands and silently left the corridor. Yes, a criminal trial will soon follow, and Laura will most likely face 3 to 5 years, maybe more. Sarah, an accomplice, will also go to trial. David, did he want this? On the one hand, yes, they stole his money, ruined his life, and hid his child. On the other hand, he understood that Emma might suffer because her mother was in prison. But there was no choice. Everything had gone too far. The day came when social services brought Emma to Tampa Bay. David prepared a room for her in advance, the former guest room, repainted the walls soft green, installed a crib, and bought toys. All this happened at a crazy pace, because before he had no children's corner, he could not even think that at the age of 38, he would suddenly become the father of a one-year-old girl. Tom helped, carrying boxes of diapers and laughing at David's clumsy attempts to figure out where and how to change a diaper. "Calm down, I have a nephew. I'll show you everything," Tom said as David fiddled with a pack of baby wipes in confusion. At the appointed time, a social service car arrived at the house. David, worried, ran out onto the porch. The same psychologist came out of the car, holding Emma in her arms. The girl was in a pink jumpsuit, with a bow in her hair, and looked at the unfamiliar house with curiosity and wariness. "Here is your dad, Emma," the psychologist said softly, handing the baby to David. "Everything will be fine, girl." David carefully took his daughter into his arms. His heart was pounding so hard that it seemed like it was about to jump out of his chest. Emma looked at him with big eyes. Then she suddenly smiled, reached for the collar of his shirt, closed her tiny fingers, and said something unintelligible, like "ba ba." A warm wave swept through David's body. He pressed the girl to him, and his eyes stung. "Thank you," he breathed, looking at the guardianship employee. "I will do everything in my power." "We will come with checks," she warned, "but I believe that you will succeed. You have already shown your determination." "Yes, of course," David nodded, struggling to contain his emotions. When the car drove away, he went into the house, where Tom was waiting with a camera at the ready. Smiling softly, his friend snapped a picture of David holding Emma in his arms. "Congratulations, Dad," he said, putting the camera down. "How do you feel?" David laughed quietly through his tears. "I don't know. Everything is so strange. But I'm glad. I'm very glad." From this day, a new life began. Morning waking up to Emma crying in her crib and demanding attention. Breakfast, oatmeal for her, coffee for him. A walk through the yard where Emma stomps barefoot on the grass, laughing enthusiastically. In the evenings, David put her in a stroller and walked along the coastal street, showing her palm trees and the sea. The neighbors looked at him in surprise, and some dared to smile, seeing how sincerely happy he was next to the baby. Gradually, the evil rumors about him subsided, because it is difficult to continue to believe that he is a cold-blooded killer if you see him with his daughter in his arms. Of course, it was not without difficulties. Emma sometimes cried at night, apparently missing her usual surroundings or remembering Laura and Sarah. David rocked her in his arms, walked around the room, sang quiet lullabies, remembering snatches of melodies that he had once listened to. Sometimes he could not calm the girl down and was exhausted to the limit. But even at these moments, looking at Emma's plump cheeks and big eyes, I felt a strange glee inside. I am responsible for her. I am her father. Finally, I'm not alone. Tom actively helped. He cooked breakfast, walked Emma when David had to go away on business. Jack, an employer from Sarasota, was accommodating and provided temporary work from home and flexible hours until David got used to being a father. Mark once came to see her and brought a gift, a life-size teddy bear, which almost scared the girl with its size. Emma cautiously touched the toy, then, realizing that it was not a living monster, she burst out laughing. "Well, I don't know how much use there is from such a colossus," David said with a laugh. "But thank you. I wanted to do something nice." Mark shrugged embarrassedly. "You look great, by the way." "Yes, I'm trying to catch up. The bosses are unhappy that I was away for a long time, but what can you do? I will pay off loans and save. I'll try to file a civil lawsuit against Laura to get at least some of the money back. I think you'll get compensation when she's convicted, if she has any funds left." David nodded. "Everything has been seized from her, including that account." "Yes," Mark glanced at Emma, who was examining the toy with a serious look. "You know, I'm glad that everything is working out this way for you. At least there is some happy outcome from all this." "Thank you," David smiled. They exchanged a brief handshake and Mark left, making it clear that he had no intention of interfering. Another month and a half passed, and the trial in the case of Laura and Sarah finally began. Charges: grand theft, fraud, forgery of documents, providing false data in some instances, possibly also criminal conspiracy. Laura and Sarah were brought to court in handcuffs, each sitting with their own lawyer. The hall was larger than at the custody hearing. Journalists filled the row for the public. The case was high profile because the story of the missing wife who came back to life a year later and deceived everyone is very scandalous. The prosecutor presented evidence: account statements, a detective's testimony about a visit to the pier, Laura's confessional words, a recording of the interrogation. The defense tried to soften it, arguing that Laura was in a difficult psychological state and was afraid of her husband. But the judge, after listening to the testimony of the witnesses, David spoke separately, and Mark, too, clearly did not feel sympathy. The defendants had a premeditated plan to siphon out money, the prosecutor said, and there was no real violence on the part of Mr. Turner. She did not present any medical certificates or complaints. Sarah admitted her guilt of complicity in part, citing the fact that she helped the woman she loved without knowing the full scale of the crime. Laura's lawyer also tried to pity the court with a difficult emotional situation, but neither the jury nor the judge were imbued with pity. David looked at Laura, who was sitting in the hall with tears in her eyes, and did not feel the same love or pain. All that remained was a cold understanding. She herself chose this path. Sarah was sitting nearby, looking depressed and avoiding looking at Laura. Apparently, their love also collapsed as soon as the money ran out and real problems began. After several days of hearings, the jury found both guilty. The judge, summing up, announced, taking into account the circumstances, the volume of stolen funds, and the deliberate deception of several individuals, including the grave consequences for the reputation of Mr. Turner and Mark Evans, Laura Turner and Sarah Mills are each sentenced to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole no earlier than 3 years. The verdict is final. The papers were signed. Laura began to cry. Sarah looked into space. Journalists scribbled notes. David, sitting at the end of the room, felt a strange sense of relief, but not joy. It's just all over, and now the stage will begin when he lives without Laura, without these terrible secrets and suspicions. A real, albeit difficult, life with his daughter begins. A month after the verdict, David had already settled into the role of a father so much that he could cook oatmeal with one hand and hold Emma with the other, so that she did not fall out of her chair. The girl adapted to the new home. She learned to smile at Tom, squeezed his stubbled cheeks, and deftly crawled on the carpet. Sometimes she cried at night, obviously missing Laura, who was her mother after all. It was hard for David to realize this, but he did not try to turn the child against his mother. He simply picked him up, rocked him, saying, "Daddy is here, everything is fine." One morning, as he was lifting Emma out of bed, she suddenly said a quiet "Daddy." It seemed like she had been babbling some sounds before, but now it sounded clear. David froze, unable to believe his ears. "Emma, what did you say?" he whispered. She looked at him with shining eyes and repeated, "Daddy." David felt a pang in his chest. He hugged the tiny body to himself, feeling his heart overflowing with love and happiness, which he had not known for a whole year of torment. "Yes, baby, I'm your daddy," he said, feeling tears welling up, "and I will always be there." 10 years flew by unnoticed. This morning in Tampa Bay was clear and sunny, and a warm wind from the bay gently stirred the leaves of the palm trees that surrounded the spacious backyard of the house at 142 South Bay Road. The same house that once looked abandoned and doomed. Now it has been transformed. The facade has been repainted in a soft cream shade, the porch is decorated with carved railings, and everywhere there are flower beds with bright flowers, which Anna, David's wife, diligently tended. David himself, older and noticeably happier, was on his feet in the morning, preparing a marinade for pork ribs, checking the gas grill, leafing through the list of products that Tom and Mark promised to bring for lunch. He had a relaxed smile on his face, a rare peace won through perseverance and time. Looking around the yard, he briefly remembered how difficult it all began. But the past dramas are left behind. Now the main thing is his family. It's been almost 4 years since he's been married to Anna, Mark's sister. It so happened that she once came with her brother to support David, and from then on they began a friendly conversation, which unexpectedly turned into warm feelings. Anna herself hesitated for some time. Too many difficulties hung behind David's shoulders, and the story of her brother with Laura was partly frightening. But time has put everything in its place. "Dad, where is my swimsuit?" came the cheerful voice of Emma, who ran out onto the porch, holding a towel in her hands. The girl is already 11, and over the years she has noticeably stretched out. Features inherited from both David and Laura have appeared in her. Her big blue eyes and blonde hair remained unchanged, and she also had a bulb of freckles on her nose, which she stubbornly tried to hide under the cream. "On the second floor, in the linen closet," David responded, smiling at his daughter. "Just don't forget to take sandals. The sun is mercilessly baking, and the ground in the backyard is hot." "Okay," Emma laughed and darted back into the house, citing that she was afraid of turning into a cutlet. David looked after her for a minute, continuing to think about how quickly time was passing. It seems like just yesterday he was learning to change diapers and rocking a crying baby in his arms at night. And now Emma jokes, laughs, talks about her plans for the holidays, and gets ready to go to high school. The noise of a motor was heard behind the fence. On the narrow path leading to the house, Tom's car appeared an old pickup truck, which he never exchanged for a newer model, claiming that an old horse does not spoil the furrows. The door opened, and Tom, who had noticeably changed over 10 years but retained the irony in his eyes, crawled out of the cabin, holding a bag of fresh vegetables in his hands. "Hey, buddy," he called out loudly to David as he walked along the path to the porch. "I thought you were the only one working on the grill here without me. Look what I brought. Corn, zucchini, peppers. Will fry them to go with the meat." "Great," David was delighted, accepting the package. "I was just thinking about the side dish. Think about how we'll cut it all up and marinate it." Tom sighed, rolling his eyes theatrically. "So you want to throw all the fuss at me again? Okay, since I'm your best friend." "Come on," David laughed. "I know that you love it when there is noise, trouble, and work in full swing around you." "I love it, yes, when no one yells," Tom grinned, "but I love it even more when everyone is together. By the way, will Mark be here soon?" "I should be arriving soon," David confirmed, and a special note of warmth slipped into his voice. Over the past years, her relationship with Mark has turned from complex twists and turns into friendship. Of course, it was not easy at first. Old grievances, awkwardness, and disappointments made themselves felt. But the fact that David eventually married Anna became a kind of bridge between them. Families began to intersect often, and the past, in which both were deceived by Laura, gradually faded into the shadows. Emma had already returned with her equipment and was now enthusiastically putting rubber ducks into the inflatable pool. Anna was fiddling around nearby, checking whether the same pool was inflated enough so that the child could splash around without fear of spilling water all over the yard. "David, honey, did you bring the pump from the warehouse? It seems to me that there's almost not enough air here." She turned to her husband. "Of course," David responded and motioned for Tom to help. "Tom, let's swing it for a couple, and at the same time check if the valve is leaking." While they were busy with the pump, Anna looked at them with a smile. She wore a floral summer dress with simple sandals on her feet. There was a butterfly-shaped clip in her hair, which she had bought in some souvenir shop in the Bahamas, where she and David had spent their honeymoon. "You know," she said softly, coming closer, "when I see you two together, Tom and you, I feel so happy. You've been through so much." "Yeah," Tom nodded, hearing her words. "We could have run away in all directions, but in the end, we're sitting here by the pool. Soon we'll be roasting ribs, and everything's somehow nice and calm." "Calm down, that's until Mark arrives," David grinned. "He promised to bring some kind of surprise, but I'm afraid it might be live lobsters." Anna laughed. "Well then, we'll have to urgently look for an ice bucket. Do you remember how last time he stunned us by dragging kilograms of seashells and began to cook an amazing author's broth?" "Oh, I won't forget this," Tom readily chimed in. "Then I was sick for 2 days from his author's culinary creativity." As luck would have it, the conversation about lobsters was interrupted by the appearance of another car. A brand new SUV with a glossy finish stopped right at the gate of the house, and Mark came out tanned, wearing a light white shirt, holding an impressive package in his hands. "Hello, everyone." Mark glanced at his friends and sister with a smile. "I hope I'm not too late." "Just right," Emma shouted, spinning around the pool. "Uncle Mark, what did you bring?" "Oh, look," he waved the bag. "There are a variety of goodies for the grill, plus a special set of spices that a chef from a local restaurant gave me the other day. He says they're perfect for barbecued ribs." David sighed internally with relief. Fortunately, no living sea creatures were observed in Mark's hands, which means we can relax. "Cool," he said. "Figure out where everything is, while I put on my apron." "Listen," Mark perked up, turning to the company. "I was thinking, maybe we can have a friendly culinary battle, like everyone makes their own version of the marinade, and then we'll compare whose tastes better." Tom waved his hand. "I passed. My job is to chop vegetables and throw them on the grill. Handle the marinades yourself." "I didn't expect such complacence from you," Mark chuckled. Tom raised his eyebrows in response. "You want me to ruin the most tender meat in the area? Okay, I can experiment, but don't complain later." Anna, as a housewife, coupled with her usual thoughtfulness, placed on the table in the garden a large plate of cut fruit, a jug of mint lemonade, and several napkins. Then she straightened the folds on the tablecloth and called Emma to her. "Let's go help me serve." "Okay, Mom," the girl agreed, and that special warmth flashed in her eyes that happens to children who know that they are always welcome here. Of course, Anna was not Emma's biological mother, but over the past years they became so attached to each other that this woman took a strong and reliable place in the girl's life. The first months, when Emma just began to get used to the new environment, were difficult, but Anna showed patience and affection without imposing herself. And as a result, the girl herself began to call her Mama Anna. "Place the plates neatly," Anna asked, handing them to Emma. "Just be careful not to knock them onto the floor." "I can do it," Emma snorted proudly, placing the plates in an even stack on the edge of the table. "By the way, Mom, will we have anything sweet today?" "Will. I baked your favorite pie with strawberries and whipped cream. Just don't eat half of it ahead of time." The girl smiled with all her teeth, and Anna couldn't resist patting her on the head. While Anna and Emma were setting the table, the male half of the company took a liking to the grill area. Nearby, in a barrel of crushed ice, there were cans of soda and beer just for such a hot day. Tom had already put slices of zucchini and peppers on skewers, and David and Mark were cooking ribs together in separate bowls, mixing the meat with spices and trying not to get in each other's hands. "Here's the sauce," Mark said, handing David a small bottle of hot chili sauce. "I added a little paprika and coriander." "So you want your ribs to win our battle, huh?" David said jokingly, squeezing the sauce into his bowl. "Well, let's see. Mark, grinning, took a spoon and began to thoroughly coat the ribs with a mixture of spices and olive oil. "I hope you haven't forgotten what's at stake," he asked. "What do we have at stake?" Tom intervened, always ready to pick up any joke. Mark looked around with the air of a conspirator and said, "The winner will have the right to demand that the losers carry out any minor tasks during the next day. For example, bring a glass of water, run to the store for ice cream, wash the car." Tom shook his head skeptically. "I'm not sure I'll have time to run around tomorrow, but I'll take the risk." "I'm not even sure I want to take part in this crazy bet of yours," David responded. "I have a meeting with a client at a construction company tomorrow. I can't be distracted by any nonsense." Mark just grinned in response. "Okay, then we cancel the bet." But the inner excitement is not. The grill began to heat up. A light smoke spread over the grill, and soon the same aroma that only happens at good picnics spread in the air. A mixture of spices, roasted meat, and fresh vegetables. Anna, hearing this, shouted from the side of the table. "Is everything ready? Can I serve salads?" "Another 10-15 minutes," David answered. "Let the ribs set well, then we'll lay them out." "Okay," she nodded. "Then I'll put out some appetizers, a cheese plate, and bread with garlic butter." Emma, beaming, ran up to the grill to conduct an inspection. "Dad, can I watch you turn the meat?" Of course, David carefully moved away, giving his daughter space. "Just don't come too close, it's very hot." The girl craned her neck, watching her father's movements with interest. She loved everything related to cooking, and even helped in the kitchen at times. Anna willingly involved her in all sorts of culinary games. "When I grow up," Emma suddenly said, without taking her eyes off the grill, "I want to open my own cafe by the sea. I will serve everything delicious there." "Wow," Tom responded. "Sounds promising. Maybe we can all make a table there with a subscription." "Of course," Emma giggled. "And I'll call it a cafe. I haven't decided what yet, but something beautiful." Mark, turning the vegetables on the grill, interjected. "Emma's Sunset Bar as an option." "Sounds great," the girl agreed. "Sunsets at Emma's." Everyone laughed in unison, imagining the bright sign on the shore. The picnic is heating up, the coals are sizzling, the ribs are almost done, and David carefully transfers them to large aluminum foil so that they just reach under the closed grill lid. Tom throws in a few sprigs of rosemary for flavor. Mark, stretching, takes one cold can from the barrel. "Guys," he says quietly, looking to the side where Anna and Emma are laughing at something of their own, "it's so good that everything turned out this way for us. I sometimes remember what we were like before, so much anger, distrust. And now here, friends, relatives, life has improved." David detected a note of touchingness in Mark's voice. "Yes, indeed, 10 years ago, everything was different. But no one wants to stir up painful memories, although they sit somewhere at the bottom." "It's nice to know that you can start over," David responded, putting the tongs away. "The main thing is not to drag past mistakes with you." Tom, in his own way, added, "It's also important to appreciate what we have. That you are not alone in this life, that there is support, mutual understanding." "And delicious food," Mark winked, trying to return the conversation to a light direction. Soon the whole company moved to the table. Palm trees rustled along the perimeter of the yard. The rays of the sun gently fell on the tablecloth, sparkling on the dishes. Tom uncorked a bottle of lemonade and poured it into glasses for Emma, Anna, and himself. Mark and David allowed themselves a glass of cold beer. "So," David said solemnly, laying out the ribs on a wooden cutting board, "let's try it." "Yours first or mine first?" Mark asked jokingly, placing his tray of meat next to it, where the aroma of spices was even sharper. "We'll arrange a general tasting tour," Tom suggested, picking at the salad with a fork. "I'll take a piece here and there, and then I'll give a verdict." Anna poured sauces into small gravy boats for everyone and invited Emma to try it first. The girl grabbed a small piece, dipped it in the sauce, bit it, and closed her eyes with pleasure. "Dad, it's delicious. A little sweet, but I like it." Then she took a piece from Mark's plate, tasted it, and frowned. "And this one is a little sharper. Cool, too." She laughed, looking at the men who were patiently waiting for her verdict. "I can't decide which is better," Emma admitted. "Both are great." "Well, it'll be a draw," Tom announced judiciously after he also tried. "I would say that David's ribs had a milder taste and caramelized crust, while Mark's had a piquant note and a slight hint of chili bitterness." "I think you both won," Anna smiled, helping herself to a portion. "But I personally prefer the Swedish version, so plus one vote from me to David." "Predictable," Mark laughed. "Why, little sister, won't you help your brother win?" She spread her hands. "Sorry, but my heart belongs to my husband." So, with jokes and fun, the company enjoyed the meal. Baked vegetables, salads, homemade bread, all this filled the yard with appetizing smells, and light conversations about plans for the next weekend created a special atmosphere of comfort. When everyone was full, it was time to get dessert. Emma, without wasting a minute, rushed to the pie, as if she was afraid that it might be taken apart without her. Anna cut the pie into portions, and the girl, looking pleased, took the largest piece for herself. "So, what do we have planned for this afternoon?" Tom asked, leaning back in his chair and patting his stomach. "Maybe we can take a walk to the beach." "I'm for it," Mark answered, wiping his hands with a napkin. "The sun is still high, and I don't mind taking a dip in the water." "Dad, will you go?" Emma asked, looking up at David. He smiled. "If I say yes, then I'll have to keep you afloat, because you'll probably want to swim to the depths." "I don't want to," the girl objected. "I can swim on my own, remember." "Yes, I know you can," David grinned. "Okay, let's go. I just need to clean everything up here, and then we'll go." "Then I'll go change," said Anna. "Suddenly I'll want to take a dip too." So they planned the rest of the day. First, they slowly collected the dirty dishes, wrapped the leftover meat in foil, and put the vegetables into containers. Anna took the pie into the refrigerator so that it would not spoil in the heat. Emma, holding a broom, helped sweep away crumbs from the tablecloth and table because she had already been taught to be independent and have order in the house. Tom casually took over cleaning the grill. He carefully cleared the grates from the burnt bits so as not to put it off until later after all. Who knows whether he will be in the mood for work that evening? "It's so hot," he commented, wiping sweat from his forehead. "It's good that the bay is nearby, and we can jump into the water at any time." "Yes," Mark supported him. "I'm ready to run there right now." "Be patient," David laughed, checking that all the spice jars were closed. "We still need to get there. The beach is a few blocks away." "Hey, who has a bigger car to fit everyone?" Tom asked. "My pickup can accommodate 4 people, but it will be a bit cramped," he replied. "I have an SUV, it's more spacious," Mark suggested. "We'll go together and let the pickup rest here." So they decided. When everything was in relative order, the whole company changed into light beach clothes and left the hospitable courtyard. David checked the house was locked and grabbed the keys to Mark's SUV, casually joking that he wouldn't trust him to drive after he almost got stuck on the beach that one time. "Are you laughing? It was just one time." Mark was indignant, letting Anna into the salon. "And that one time I saved you with a tractor," Tom added. "So yeah, it's better to let David lead." The road to the beach took about 10 minutes. The streets of Tampa Bay no longer seemed as abandoned as 10 years ago. The city gradually developed. New cafes, playgrounds, neat benches under shady trees appeared. But the old coastal houses with reddish tiles have not yet disappeared. The bay has always retained this indescribable atmosphere of relaxation. Having parked, the company walked out to the sandy shore. Warm waves rustled onto the shore, the bright sun reflected in the water, and a light breeze carried the salty aroma of algae. Emma, seeing a spacious strip of sand, instantly threw off her sandals and rushed towards the waves. "Be careful," David shouted to her, but the girl just waved her hand at him. "Everything is fine." Anna, smiling, spread a blanket on the sand, took out sunscreen, and began to rub it into her shoulders, warning, "Don't get burned, boys. The sun is treacherous today." "Don't be afraid, my skin is used to it," Tom said confidently, taking off his t-shirt. "But the cream won't hurt." "Then I'll anoint you now," Anna suggested. "Sit down." Tom obediently sat down, extended his hands, and Anna, laughing, began to spread the cream. "Look at me," Mark intervened. "I've been under air conditioning in my office all summer, so I risk getting burned in half an hour." "Well, come here," laughed Anna, who already felt like sunscreen duty. "Listen, sister, maybe I can handle it myself." Mark feigned indignation. "Okay, handle it," she shrugged. At this time, David was looking after Emma, who was already fearlessly splashing around in the water, enthusiastically bouncing on the waves. He carefully walked up to his ankles, felt a pleasant coolness, and felt an amazing peace in his soul. The sea always pacified him, as if it washed away the remnants of tension and anxiety that were inevitably encountered in everyday life. "Dad, go deeper," Emma shouted, calling him closer to her. David smiled and took a few more steps, and he still remained vigilant. The daughter was already a fairly decent swimmer, but the father remained cautious in everything. Suddenly, on the horizon, he noticed that one of the local guys was setting up a beach volleyball net. "Hey guys, let's go play," he suggested, looking around at his comrades. "Why not?" Tom perked up, having already managed to stretch his shoulders. "There don't seem to be many people. We can take one side." "Anna, are you with us?" Mark asked, splashing a handful of water on himself. "Well, I'm not very good at volleyball," she answered hesitantly. "I'd rather sunbathe and look after Emma." "I can also tinker with it," Tom suggested, "and you, David, and Mark run after the ball." But Emma suddenly said, "No, I will play. I can serve." "Seriously?" David looked at his daughter with curiosity. "Well, if you want, we'll try." So they distributed themselves. Anna remained under the umbrella, where there were towels, a bag of water, light snacks, and books to read. Mark, David, Tom, and Emma headed to the volleyball court, where two local boys had just finished stringing the net. A friendly conversation ensued, and the guys kindly offered to unite into teams and have a small match. The ball was old, but quite good. Emma, delighted, grabbed it and threw it high into the air, trying to make an impression. Mark joked, "Make sure you don't fly into the depths after him." The end result was two teams of three: Emma, David, and one of the boys against Tom, Mark, and the other guy. The sun was hot on my head, but the adrenaline from the game quickly made me forget about the stuffiness. They had fun serving the ball, hitting it over the net, and sometimes made comical mistakes. Emma laughed as Mark fell awkwardly onto the sand, trying to save the ball. "Yes, I'm too old for this," Mark laughed, shaking himself off. "You're just an office plankton." Tom teased him, switching to a whisper so that no one would be offended by this word. David, meanwhile, proudly noted that Emma serves well, although she hits rather weakly. "But for 11 years old, this is already worthy." "Wow, well done." He encouraged her when she managed to throw the ball over the net, earning a point. "Have you seen it?" Emma squealed with delight. We saw it," Tom smiled, admitting the team's defeat. The game ended when the sun dropped slightly to the horizon, and the players no longer had the strength to run on the hot sand. Flushed, they scattered back to the seating area where Anna was sitting. "How are you doing, volleyball players?" she asked, taking off her wide sunglasses. "We won," Emma exclaimed, lounging on a towel nearby. "We had 21-18. "Wow, congratulations," Anna smiled. "It turns out that your team had strong players." Mark, plopping down next to him, grumbled. "Well, not that much. We were just a little unlucky." "Yes, yes," Tom chuckled. "Better tell me that you had a cramp in your leg." "Okay," David patted Mark on the shoulder. "You're doing great too. The main thing is to have fun." They lay out on beach towels, allowing the cool wind to blow over their hot bodies. Anna took out a bottle of water and gave everyone a sip. "This is what you need," Tom said with satisfaction, emptying half the bottle in one gulp. After half an hour of measured rest, Emma suggested taking another dip in the water to wash off the sand. Anna and Mark joined her, leaving Tom and David on the shore, who began a casual conversation while looking out at the waves. "Listen," Tom spoke quietly, "it's great that everything is like this. Just an idol, right?" "Yeah," David responded briefly, twirling a small flat stone in his fingers with satisfaction. "Sometimes I'm even scared of how good everything has become, as if I'm afraid that at any moment something will disturb the peace." Tom nodded understandingly. "Yes, it happens to me too. You just have to accept the present. Time passes, people change." David watched as Anna took Emma's hand, helping her swim a little further, and Mark dived nearby. "You know," he said, "but Anna made me truly happy. I didn't think that after everything that happened, I could trust someone so much. I'm happy for you, old man. Tom gave him a friendly slap on the shoulder. The main thing is that you didn't lock yourself away after those dark times. Well, you also made a huge contribution, David said sincerely. Without your support, when I first came out, I could have gone crazy. Okay, Tom waved it off, as if not wanting to accept the praise. But actually, I'm pleased. The sun was slowly setting, and the beach became more and more beautiful. A soft golden pink light flooded the sea. The sky was painted in delicate pastel colors. Mark and Anna climbed ashore, shaking themselves off the water. Emma, cheerful and excited, caught up with them running and literally fell on the towel. It's getting a little cold, Anna noted, wrapping Emma in a large towel. Let's dry ourselves, otherwise it will blow. It's no longer hot, Mark agreed, running his hand through his wet hair. Maybe it's time to get ready to go home. Yes, at home, we still need to wash the plates after the picnic, and we all have our own things to do tomorrow, David answered. I don't want to go home, Emma protested faintly, but everyone saw that she was tired. Tomorrow we can get out again if we have any strength left, Tom suggested. I don't know, I have work in the morning, Mark said. But by the evening quite. Then we'll see, David concluded. Okay, people, let's wind down. The way back was spent in warm conversations. Emma dozed off in the back seat of the SUV, cuddled up to Mark, who supported her head with a good-natured smile so that it would not hit the glass. Tom sat in front next to David and told some funny story about his new colleague. When they returned to the house on South Bay Road, the sun had already disappeared below the horizon and the sky was turning a deep purple. David carefully carried his dozing daughter out of the car. Anna went ahead to open the door. Tom and Mark quietly brought in the remaining towels and bags. Good night, guys, Tom said goodbye to them on the porch. I think I'll go to my place. I have a delivery appointment for building materials tomorrow. As always, eternal running. Mark nodded with understanding. And I'll move too. My friends should come to me from Orlando. They hugged goodbye and agreed to call each other. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.